Good day, and thank you for joining me to hear more about my doctoral research at Baylor University in the EDD Learning and Organizational Change program. I am Tammy Chambers, and today I'm excited to share my research on understanding teachers' experience in transitioning from a reading test preparation approach to the whole novel approach, a narrative case study. In this presentation, we'll start out looking at the problem statement, the why behind the research that I did. Then we'll move on to the literature review, which will discuss all the articles that I found that were relevant to my research. Then I'm going to discuss the purpose statement, and then we'll move into the research questions that really delve into what was it I was looking to find out. After that, we'll look at our theoretical framework, the kind of the lens through which I looked at my research. We'll move on to the methodology and how I moved through the research, an overview of what I found out, our findings. Then we'll look at the implications of this research, my plan for distribution, the key references, and then a closing. Los Fresnos CISD is a highly rated school district with an accountability score of a 94. In the state of Texas, out of 1,200 school districts, we're one of 97 districts to have a 94 or higher for their accountability score. When you add the fact that we serve a high population of Hispanic students and low socioeconomic status students, it's even more remarkable of how well we perform on our STAR exams, even excelling above our region and state levels. However, sometimes that focus on state accountability has unintended consequences. That brings me to my problem statement. When I looked at the STAR, the State of Texas Assessment of Academic Readiness reading scores, they've been stagnant for 5 years. When I look at instruction in the classroom, I see the teachers are teaching to prepare students for STAR exams with test-centric literacy approaches. So that made me start thinking about what research can I do to help target this problem. For my literature review, I wanted to start out looking at the STAR test, the State of Texas Assessment of Academic Readiness, specifically the STAR test for reading. So when I started looking at the research on high stakes standardized testing and the STAR test, what I found was these tests increase anxiety for both teachers and students. A lot of times the administrators put pressure on the teachers to get good scores, and those teachers turn around and put that pressure on the students. So it builds this anxiety in the classroom and in the learning environment for what those outcomes will be on the scores of whether or not the students are learning at a high proficiency level. The next part of the STAR that I really evaluated was what happens in the classroom? What happens with the curriculum? What are the test-centric literacy practices that are put into place in the classrooms? And I found a lot of research detailing how assessment changes classroom practices. And the impacts on the curriculum were both positive and negative. Some teachers and some administrators and some researchers found the positive aspects were that teachers were more intentional on what they taught. They followed the standards much more closely. They learned the standards. They knew exactly what they needed to be successful in the classroom. Some of the negative impacts on curriculum was teachers started teaching to the model of the test. So instead of teaching reading skills independently, where you really delve in and the students learn all the important information about a skill, instead, they would give the students a short reading passage and then questions to test multiple skills, just like they were going to see on the cumulative exam of the STAR test. After I really got a good understanding of state testing in my literature review, I moved on specifically to middle school reading. And the first thing I found in the research was a lot of information on adolescent readers. They definitely want to read things that they enjoy. They want to have choice in the matter. They want to choose their books. They want interaction with their co-students in the classroom. And when I moved on from that, I looked at reluctant readers, because reluctant readers are definitely a group of a part of adolescent readers. You have some students who really love to read and gravitate towards that, and others who are reluctant to do that. And in my literature review, I found that there are a lot of people who suggest, and a lot of research that suggests that students don't not enjoy reading. It's more they haven't found what they enjoy to read. So that brought me to the importance of the volume of reading, because one of the research protocols and important pieces that I learned from reluctant readers was volume of readers, volume of reading really determines how well you read. And so I did a lot of research on the volume of reading in my literature review. And ultimately, I came to the whole novel approach as a way to implement this model that allowed students to read authentic literature. It allowed them time to read alone. It allowed them time in class for silent reading. It allowed a lot of group work for students to talk to one another, to share what they had read, to give their understanding of the reading, and to sit in a Socratic seminar and debate what they believed about the characters and the story and the plot and the setting, and to really build upon those experiences in their discussions one another, both in small groups, in pairs, and with their teacher during reading conferences. The purpose of this research was to look at the experience of the middle school reading teachers in Los Fresnos CISD, and to really follow their transition from the test-centric literacy approach to the whole novel approach, and to really delve into their story and see how this process went for them, how change resistance played a role in the evolution of their instruction over the last 3 years of implementing this new approach. Now, for my research, I had 2 research questions. My primary question was, how do reading teachers describe their experience in a district-initiated transition from test-centric literacy instruction to the whole novel approach? My secondary question asked, after 3 years of participating in the whole novel approach, what were the most significant changes the reading teachers encountered throughout the process? So my first year of the whole novel, the teachers read 2 novels. The second and third year, they read 4 novels each. So they had participated in the whole novel approach for a total of 3 years. These 2 questions were very important to me because I really wanted to hear the story from the teachers. I wanted to know what this experience was like for them, how they viewed the training that they received, the professional learning sessions that they sat in, the mentoring and coaching that was provided, the support that was provided from the district, the resources they were given in the classroom, the curriculum that was written for the approach, the purchase of resources that they needed to implement the whole novel approach. So these 2 research questions really allowed me to delve into those answers. Next, we come to the theoretical framework, which was one of my favorite pieces of this research study. I looked at many organizational change models, and I was elated to find the emerging change model from Lawrence that he published in 2014. The piece of this model that is my absolute favorite is the reflective dialogue process. In the reflective dialogue process, I'm going to start out listening to you, listening to what you have to say. Everyone has the opportunity to use their voice and share their thoughts and opinions. And as we are listening and sharing, we both want to put our perspectives aside, take a moment to listen to the other person, and walk away with a new emerged idea of what concept we are looking at and how best to resolve any issues that we have by being curious and listening. And that is the reflective process, taking your thoughts and mine and combining them into the ultimate understanding and situation that is going to be best for everybody as they transition through this change. That reflective dialogue was at the heart of this change management protocol. It also looked at the identity of the person that I was interviewing. Who are they? Why are they here? What is important for them? Then we looked at their purpose. What are we doing with this whole novel transition, and where do they want this to take them in the future as they move through this change? Then finally, we looked at their perspective. Who are they, and who are they in this change process, and how can they add to this and learn from one another? All of this fell under the umbrella of the power in politics and who was in charge of the whole novel approach. And now we're going to talk about my methodology. I chose a single narrative case study because I wanted it to be a single case study because I'm looking at the importance of this particular situation in depth. I did not want to find out what was generally true of the many. I wanted to really focus and hone in on these teachers and their experience in the whole novel approach transition. I chose story because of the power of the story. In Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability TEDx Houston presentation, she said these words that stayed with me as a researcher. Brown declared, I thought, I'm a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. Maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. I chose a narrative analysis because I am using stories as data. I'm taking the first-hand accounts of teachers' experiences told in the story form. I wanted the whole novel approach to capture what it's like for the teachers to move through this transition in their own words. So maybe I'm using stories to illuminate the soul behind my data, or maybe I'm just a storyteller using the form of a narrative case study. I wanted to pull the detailed stories and life experiences of these reading teachers to help understand change resistance. For my site selection, participants, and sampling, I used Los Fresnos CISD middle school reading classrooms with middle school reading teachers, and I followed their transition from the whole novel approach for 3 years. The first year, the teachers read 2 novels with their classrooms. The second and third year, they read 4 novels with their classrooms. I had a questionnaire for 6 reading teachers and then 5 semi-structured interviews for reading teachers to really delve into those stories. During my data analysis, I used restoring of the stories. I developed themes based on what I heard in multiple interviews. I defined cross-case themes, and I interpreted patterns of meaning. The ethical considerations for my project were informed consent, participant pseudonyms, and a secure database. Now we're going to look at my findings. And the first major finding I had was that teachers wanted more time to learn an approach before they taught it in their classrooms. The whole novel approach was introduced in our August professional learning and then implemented that fall. So the teachers had a few weeks to really dig into the new process before they started the work. And they felt like they didn't want to learn the approach as their students were experiencing it in the learning environment. So definitely there was a great finding on more time for the teachers to process this new instructional method. Additionally, the teachers who felt like their opinions were validated and their changes were implemented were more accepting of the whole novel transition than those teachers who felt like their thoughts were disregarded about the change. And the teachers voiced that they wanted to be heard. They wanted someone to listen to them, and they wanted someone to create solutions for the issues that they had. Now, in talking to the varied teachers, one of the other important findings that I found was that the younger teachers felt less heard than the more experienced teachers. And that's an area that I think we really need to dig into and look at as to how much we're valuing each person's voice. Because one of the things that I shared with them is we always want to value every voice in the room. So maybe we need to shift our understanding of veteran versus new teacher and give value to all voices. The third finding was how essential the reflective dialogue from the emerging change model was. Leaders have to have empathy. They have to set aside their view as the leader, their thoughts, and listen to the view and those views of the participants who are really boots on the ground making this change happen. So you have to set aside your own view, listen, and reshape your thinking. So leaders have to listen to their followers in order to enact real successful change. It is a reflective dialogue process that you go through of voicing, listening, and reflection, but it is essential to impacting and lasting change. My final finding was that leaders must follow an organizational change model and ensure teachers have the support that they need to be successful. Teachers had thoughts on every single component of the emerging change model, which shows me this would be a great model for districts to use for an organizational change process. But this was a key finding because everyone found each of those pieces important. I did not have a single teacher who didn't have important information about each component. So that was another essential finding, that organizational change models are really fundamental to change processes. I learned from Burns that change literature regularly quotes failure rates as to 60 to 90% of all change efforts. So I think this was an important lesson that would have been very important as we started the whole novel change process. And so one of my major implications from this study is that district curricular initiatives will find more teacher support when they implement a strong research-based organizational change model, like the ECM, the emerging change model that I use for my theoretical framework. You really have to ask yourself, how ready are the teachers for this change? And in listening to my teachers, some of the implications that came up were we needed more professional learning, we needed it earlier, and we needed more time for the teachers to process this change. And I believe that's a part of the implications that you can really impact when you front load what you're doing, giving the teachers the opportunity to engage in reflective dialogue about the change. So another implication is leaders and teachers must get curious and delve into the change process so they can incorporate reflective dialogue and learn from one another to bring about successful change. Participants need a voice in this process. Lawrence says we need to be deeply curious about what others are thinking. And he implies that reflection is a process where I integrate what I've heard to my current reality of thinking such that a new reality emerges. And I do believe that reflective dialogue process was not as evident in this study. One of the things that I saw was people who are teachers with lots of experience felt much more respected and listened to than teachers who had less experience or were new teachers. Some of them just didn't have confidence in their own belief that they should have a voice at the table, while others felt that when they tried to speak, they were shut down. So I think leaders need to respect and value everyone that sits at the table, respect and value their voices, so you can really bring about a change and have people comfortable in the process to share their views, to create new thinking. My final implication is a longer introductory period is advised for curricular initiatives, especially one like this. Our teachers were asking for a process on how to teach novels, and so we selected this process to use with the teachers. But one of the big implications was they needed more time to process before they actually implemented the lessons. Some of them felt like they were flying while they were building the plane. And so that's another implication, that time before you make the curricular initiative is very important as well. My distribution plan will start with a professional academic presentation. This presentation will be about 45 minutes. At the conclusion of the presentation, I will give the audience members about 10 to 15 minutes to ask questions, seek clarification, or make comments about the importance of the research or where they think it should go in the future. I believe the target audience best for my research is going to be the people who lead professional learning and curriculum and instruction in my district. So I will start by inviting the executive directors for academics, the executive director for support services, the curriculum coordinator, who is responsible for curriculum in our districts and professional learning for the content areas, the strategists who work on the ground with the teachers and are in their classrooms and are planning the professional learning session by content, and the instructional technologists that bring in that additional piece of technology into the classroom.
I have listed here some of the most important references that I used throughout my research process.
Thanks for your time and interest in my research. I have learned significant lessons through this research process, and my hope is for all of us to use our research to bring about lasting change to spark significant learning for our students. Thank you and goodbye.